Hi, I'm John Nixon from Eagle Lake Woodworking. I wanted to show you my method for making loose tenon joinery on the router table. Let's start by going over the components of the system. Router mounted in a table with an electronic device that moves the router up and down. I have a switch mounted on the router table itself, as well as a foot switch that controls the same operation. Toggle switch determines if it's going up or down. So with the aid of the foot switch, I can perform operations on the router that will bring the router bit up into the work. The next aspect of this system is typical tenon jig with a couple of minor modifications mounted on the router table that will move back and forth and cut the mortise in each piece. And I control the travel of the router left to right by the use of these stops. I have the stops labeled with ruler marks that allow me to set the travel left to right. And there's a stop on each side of the tenon jig. And I would set these equidistant, which will allow the tenon fixture to move back and forth. Here's a view from the top. I'm going to remove the tenon jig to illustrate a point. I have a spiral upcut bit chucked into the router, and I have two stops that will control the travel of the fixture left to right. So first thing I'm going to do is center the jig. I've designed these stops on the left and right side so when they're flush with the outside of the miter track, that zeroes the tenon jig, essentially centering it on the router bit. So now when I move these out equidistant, that will determine the travel left to right of the tenon jig. So I'm going to dial those in, set up to make a mortise that's just under 2 inches wide. Now that I have those locked in, you'll notice the distance that the tenon jig can travel is restricted by those stops. Here's the two pieces that I'm going to join. Typical loose tenon joinery in a rail and style fashion. We're going to create a mortise here and a mortise on the end of this board, and then a loose tenon will join the two. So the next step is to center the tenon jig so that the mortise will be created in the middle of this board. And as long as I don't make an adjustment between cutting the mortise in the rail or the style, the mortise will be equidistant from the face of each. The next thing I'm going to do is mark center lines, similar to biscuit joinery. It is this center line that I'm going to align with the center line on the jig itself. Next, I'm going to clamp the piece in place. I'll have the foot pedal on the floor, activating the bit coming up out of the table. I've set the maximum depth on my router so that depth stop will prevent the router bit from coming up too far. Mortise on the first board is complete. We're going to move on to mortising the other board. Again, we've got a center line on this board, and there's a center line on the fixture itself. to do the second piece. So we have the exact same mortise width on the second board as well, equidistance from the face of the board. Now all that's left is to cut a loose tenon that's going to join the two. Here we have the finished product, matching mortises in each piece and a loose tenon that will join the two. Very strong joint, easy to make with this setup. Glued in, that won't come apart.